Alright y'all, let's get some filming done today. Check out this cool shirt that my friend gave me. It's got a dragon on it. I'm gonna fall off the chair trying to show you this shirt. But it's extra fitting because the book I'm working on right now has dragons in it. So that's cool. What's today's video? Why, today we are doing an AAR, an after action review, for my beta process for the first book in the Adventure of Mage series. And good news! Unlike after I finished the beta period for Dragonfly, for this book I do not feel like I need to abandon it or set it aside, so that's already we're doing better. Although, to be honest with you, I'm very attached to this book, and it would be harder to get me to set it aside. I do still have a few people moving through the beta process, like 2 or 3 stragglers, but for the most part, everybody is finished. I did have a lot of volunteers this time, which was really exciting. It was so great to have so many people interested in beta reading this book.
I volunteer! I volunteer! I volunteer as tribute!
So let's go through the numbers first of how many people volunteered to read, how many people actually finished, how many people DNF'd, and just sort of things like that. So I've got a spreadsheet here. I keep everything on a nice spreadsheet so I can keep track of everything. Let's count how many people volunteered.
A few moments later.
So I had a record number of volunteers. 63 people volunteered to read this book. However, almost all of them were people who had never read for me before. So going into this, I knew that even though I got a big number, most of them were not going to finish. So, how many people actually finished the book?
A few moments later.
So out of 63 people who volunteered to read it, 17 finished the book. Now how about people who DNF'd? I had 6 people DNF the book. And most of them, it was for life situations, although I did have a couple of them say that they just weren't vibing with the book and they were going to give it up. They all gave it up fairly early, if they gave it up. If anyone else in that group started reading, they never told me or sent me any feedback, so I'm guessing that no one else actually even started reading. So if my math is right, and it might not be because I am not the strongest at math, that means that 40 people volunteered to read this book and never even started, which does go to show you how difficult it is to get beta readers on board. Now, like I said, there is the factor that I do have a couple of betas who are still reading, so factor in 2 or 3 people who haven't finished yet into that list, but yeah. That's why I pretty much always take anyone who wants to read for me, because I know that many people are never even going to start. So even though it seemed like I got a lot of betas, vast majority, didn't even read word 1. They just thought it would be a fun idea, but then never actually remembered or never actually got to it. I hold no hard feelings towards those people. I'm sure they had every intention of beta reading it and just never got around to it. For the most part, I was also extremely pleased with the quality of the beta readers that I got, especially since I got so many newbies who had never beta read from me before. Some of them had never beta read at all, but most of them had never read from me before. Most of my regulars, I would call it, were just too busy this time for this specific round, which is perfectly fine and reasonable. Obviously, I'm asking for volunteers, and if you don't have time, you don't have time. There were only a couple, who I'm not going to name any names or call anybody out, whose feedback was maybe a little bit less helpful, but with the sheer number of betas that I got finishing the book, like having a couple who were maybe a bit more mean-spirited in their comments, perfectly fine. Like, I'll take it. What do I mean by mean-spirited? Well, criticism should be constructive, so I'm looking for people saying this didn't work for me, or even better, this didn't work for me because. Where you run into the mean-spirited is people who tell you this book is boring, this book is bad, and unless you rewrite it the way I want you to, it's always going to be boring and bad. That's where you run into the problem. And honestly, I am thrilled that a huge majority of my beta readers, who literally are strangers to me, turned out to be really good at it. Now let's talk about just some details of the beta process overall, and just like some humorous things that came up. I'm not going to be shading any of my betas, because like I said, majority did such a good job. So first of all, I want to say, bless the hearts of the betas who tried to format for me. I didn't ask anyone to format, but some probably just felt like their reading experience would be better if they did. Bless your hearts, I format the book last. That's the last thing I do before publishing, so Thank you for trying. I'm sorry. Also, though, little tip to those who were trying to format, using the paragraph to go down to make a chapter begin on the next page is the wrong way to do it. You need to use a page break. Otherwise, your final version is going to be all wonky. I sometimes worry that I struggle with beginnings, and people were overall pretty satisfied with my beginning. Like, there were no major, like, overhaul notes, just small things that I could easily fix, and that was great. Which actually kind of brings me to another thing that I wanted to talk about, and I don't know if I have in my notes, and that is how I decided to tackle the beta phase this time on my end. Even though I've done beta phase lots of times with lots of books, I'm still streamlining it, I'm still learning how to make it the best it can be. And what I had been doing is let the beta readers leave all of their notes, and then I would read them all at the end, which became extremely overwhelming. That much feedback, it would just kind of send me into a spiral. Even if it was helpful feedback, it could still make me feel really bad about my book, through no fault of the beta readers, just because there was so much of it and it was so daunting. But what I decided to do this time was to go ahead and read their notes as they came in, as best I could. I did all of this on Google Docs, so my email would alert me when they had made edits, and so then when I had time, sometimes on my lunch break, sometimes in the evenings after work, I would go in and just look at all of the edits left by a particular beta, whoever had been reading that day. That let the betas know that I was looking at their notes, and also let me not become completely swamped and overwhelmed at the end. Now, I kept with my usual habit of not talking back to the betas. There are a couple that I just asked like a brief question to, or even just communicated with in a fun way, but for the most part I never comment back to betas because I feel that commenting to critique can lead to excuse making rather than working on making the story better. I don't need to waste my time making excuses about why they think the thing that didn't work works. It didn't work for them, I believe them, and if I want to change it, I change it. Possibly some betas would have liked a little bit more feedback from me, but honestly I think I am going to keep with this trend of not replying because A, it makes my going through their notes much faster, and B, like I said, it prevents me from making excuses, except in my head. I was endlessly entertained by some of my beta's feedback, especially there was a specific beta who didn't like my main characters and actually sided with my villains, which I think is like delightful and fascinating. I'm not one of those people who thinks that you have to read my book a certain way, so if you don't take to the main characters and the villains are more interesting to you, that's cool. Like, I'm into it. This reader seemed a bit dismayed that my main characters are not lawful good, because they are not. They are chaotic good at best, and so they do not obey the law. They are technically, by the letter of the law, in the wrong for most of this book, and that bothered a particular reader, and I think that is delightful. I love to see that people get different things from my book. Not everybody has to read it exactly the same way. I feel a lot more confident, like I said, after going through this book than I did with Dragonfly. This book does not need any huge overhaul structural changes. Like Dragonfly, I think the only way I would be satisfied with it is if I rewrote the entire first half. This book doesn't need anything like that. Now, of course, it needs some changes, but there's no big thing that's like this entire section of the book isn't working, which is great, reassuring, love to hear it. So here's the thing. If I ever come to you and say, you know what, I'm thinking of becoming a freelance copy editor, slap whatever device I'm holding out of my hand, because friends, I do not notice typos. Some of my most intrepid beta readers took it upon themselves to correct the typos and grammatical errors that my eyes just do not see. There were sentences where a whole word was in the wrong place in the sentence. Yes, that word did belong in the sentence, but my dyslexic brain put it in the wrong place and still read the sentence correctly every time. I am both grateful to those intrepid beta readers, but also apologize, and also it was rather daunting to open up their comments and realize there were hundreds, because these bold betas were correcting all of my errors. I think the way I'm going to do it next time is to have the robo voice read me the book back before I send it to beta readers to try to at least thin out some of these errors, because my dyslexic brain refuses to recognize them. Something that's always just weird, for me at least, when I'm reading beta notes, if I am reading along and I have several of their notes in a row that I don't agree with and I don't want to change, I start to feel guilty and I start looking for things that I can change because I'm like, they did all this work and you're not taking any of their advice. Which isn't true, but like if I go for a stretch without agreeing with the beta, I start to feel guilty about it. Oh, and the other thing that I did in this process was that I made small corrections as I went. There are larger corrections that I wrote down in my notebook, but if it was something small, like maybe a sentence that wasn't working, and trust me, there were plenty of those, I just popped straight into the document and fixed it immediately. That was something else that really helped me feel less overwhelmed. Again, these are in no particular order, but it's really interesting at the end of the book. I asked a couple of fun questions, and one of the questions was, what color do you think that Maeve's magic would be if it was visible? I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to let you know that her magic is not. I don't know, maybe that's too much of a spoiler. Orange was the most common color, and that's really interesting. I might have to do something with that in future books. It's not the color that I would have ever given her, but at the same time, like thinking about it, I'm like, you know what, it kind of makes sense. There was one beta who it was 100% the audience for this book. That beta picked everything up that I was putting down. They noticed the themes and the little details that I put into the story. They loved the characters. Like, when you find your perfect reader, it is so apparent and so beautiful. Obviously, most readers, majority readers, are not going to be your perfect reader, and most of my betas weren't that, but the one person who was, just like all of their notes were, they got me. They got me and they got my characters, which always feels so good. Let's talk about the Briard chapters. Thomas and Reynold Briard are two of our villains, and I added in some chapters from their points of view, which are not in the original version that's on Wattpad. I added these chapters pretty much strictly because my alpha readers were making fun of me for my villains being too Disney-like. Because we only got to see them from the main character's point of view, they were pretty much considered fairly evil. So I gave them their own points of view, chapters that exist only to let you get to know these characters a little bit better. Not necessarily like them, I want to make that clear, but understand them more. These chapters do not have an arc, there is no side plot for the Briards. This is just to get to know them as characters. And it was about a 50-50 split for people who really liked those chapters and people who thought they were pointless, which does make it tough on me deciding whether I want to keep them or get rid of them. I think my more character-oriented readers were happy to see some characterization for these folks, but my more plot-oriented readers were frustrated that they don't have really a side plot or anything going on other than characterization. And both of those things are perfectly valid, and it's up to me as the author whether I want to keep those chapters in, and right now at least I'm leaning towards keeping them in, even though I might get some lower scores on Goodreads because not everybody's going to like those chapters and some people are going to think they're pointless. It was definitely an interesting experience hopping between different beta notes. Because I was reading them as they came in, I would read, if someone left me a few notes, I would read those and then I would hop on to the next notes that someone left me. And I would have to stop sometimes and remember, like, what is this beta's, like, style? Where are they in the story? It would be a little bit weird hopping around like that, but I think preventing me from getting completely overwhelmed was better than worrying about me getting a little bit confused every now and then. I think my biggest issue with this book came at the emotional climax, which is a scene that I was very fond of, but I need to rework a little bit because I wanted the focus to be on the emotions of the two characters who were in the scene, but instead a large number of betas were more worried about a character who wasn't even in the scene at all. So I need to tweak that to try to get people's focus back on the characters who are having the emotions actually in the scene, and not the potential emotions of someone else. That's on me, I have to figure out how to make that work. Another thing I noticed that a couple of my betas pointed out things that this book has in common with J.K. Rowling's books. Yeah, I mean, it's a book that has wizards in it, so some of the magic is probably going to be similar. And also, yes, we both used giant spiders, but so did Tolkien. Giant spiders are a very common, tried and true trope. But I do want to point out that just because a book has similarities to J.K. Rowling does not mean that I was cribbing in any way from J.K. Rowling. Actually, the inspiration for a lot of the situations in this book came from the Dragon Age video games, specifically Dragon Age Inquisition. So if you've played that game and then you read this book, see if you can spot the parallels. One more small thing that was kind of just humorous to me. I'm not blaming anybody for this, but in the story, the characters have a very large wagon in which you could live, and it's pulled by a single horse. And a lot of people really struggle with that idea. They're like, is the horse magic? How is she doing that? Strawberry is essentially Clydesdale. She's a big girl and she's very strong. She's healthy, she's strong, she's built like a brick shithouse. So she's fine. Horses smaller than that can pull wagons that size. May I introduce you to the Tinker horse or the Vanner horse? Yeah. So that was just something that amused me. Well, I think maybe because we're so used to seeing like the Budweiser Clydesdales, all these horses hooked up to this little bitty wagon, all those horses are for show, not because they are needed to pull the weight of that little wagon. All right, and now a few little last things. Most people finishing this story gave it a 7 out of 10, which I feel like is a pretty solid score. And everyone who finished the book said that they would be willing to beta read book 2. I do want to say one thing, this happened to me with not one, but 2 beta readers. 2 betas contacted me afterward, which is fine, I give you my email, but both of them gave me their phone numbers, wanting to chat in person. Don't give out your phone number to strangers on the internet. I'm a stranger. Don't give me your phone number, okay? Thank you. This has just been a PSA from Julian, even if the person seems friendly, which I am. Also, I'm sorry, but I'm probably never going to want to talk to you verbally, FaceTime, or anything like that. I actually don't like talking on the phone at all. I'm a typical millennial, so don't try to talk to me on the phone. It's never going to happen. I'm probably also not going to be able to be in your writers group. I'm already in a couple of writers groups, and I just don't have really time for more. It's nothing against you, but if you became my beta reader in hopes that I would become your bestie, that's probably not the arrangement we're gonna have, but hopefully you've still enjoyed my book. And I'm super, super glad that all of you read it, that so many people finishing this book, helping to make it better. So good. Don't give me your phone number though. I hope this video isn't a million years long, but those are my thoughts after going through all of, or most of, my beta notes. So super, super excited to have had so many interested parties, even though many of them didn't finish, but also quite a few of them did. And those that did, majority left really helpful and amazing notes, and I was super excited to find at least one who is my ideal reader, which means that there might be more of them out there, and that is a happy thought. You can check out the books that I have already published, linked in the doobly-doo. I will also be coming out later this year with a different book, not Adventurer Mage, but a different book, which I was querying for a while and I've decided to self-publish, so that's really exciting. It's called Boots. It's a Puss in Boots retelling. Just a fun little fantasy story. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget that you can support me over on my Patreon, and all of the links to my social media and everything else you could possibly want from me are in the doobly-doo for ease of your clicking. Stay tuned to this channel for the next time I'm looking for beta readers. A huge thank you again to any of my awesome beta readers who are watching, and I will see all of you again next time with whatever it is I happen to be doing next time. Bye!
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
My 96, Callison, SV, Celia, Taya, Alyssa, Rita, Deborah, Afra, Melissa, AC, Swamp Goblin Waifu, Ashley, Sophia, Merween, Kit, Hidden Glade, Light Julie, Belle, Patrick, and Sophie, Ray, Shelby, Zaire, Jesper, Rennie, Scribbling Cat, Savvy, Jenny, Amanda, Lisa, and Sarah. I just made something unexpected, something sharp, something new. It's not symmetrical or perfect, but it's beautiful, and it's mine. What else can I do?